Welcome to the Culture of Writing podcast, where writers, editors, and content strategists from Salesforce talk about how we work together to improve our craft and make content better. Thank you for joining, and I am going to ask you, if you don't mind, if I take the liberty of starting an introduction of you, because I feel like not that I can do a better job, but I feel like I might be a little more expansive than you might be about yourself, and introduce you as Ian Varley, who is a principal architect at Salesforce.
Yes.
With many responsibilities. But the reason we wanted to talk to you was you do an internal engineering podcast, which does an absolutely amazing job at explaining, Salesforce's vast company with 80,000 employees and all these technologies and all these cross currents. And you just do a wonderful job explaining. But that's internal. So that's for Salesforce employees because it talks about super secret projects and things that we're working on. This isn't. But so I wanted to kind of give you a chance to, or I wanted to give myself a chance, I'll be completely selfish, to talk to you kind of really about some of the other interesting things that you've talked about, which is how AI is intersecting with writing, and particularly the writing that we do. So is that a fair start at an
I love it. Absolutely. And yes, I've been my job here at Salesforce is a bit of a weird one. I've been here for almost 15 years. And I used to do a lot more external public speaking and podcasting and so forth than I do. But over the past few years, my audience has really just become the engineering team primarily at Salesforce, because we're big enough now that it's hard for people to even understand what's going on and who's doing what and why are we doing this and so forth. So that's really most of my effort goes in there. And I do that in a lot of ways. The podcast, I do internal talks and write docs and organize events and write newsletters and all kinds of stuff like that. Yeah.
Well, I was in a meeting that you gave it must have been this week. Everything seems like 6 months ago, and it was
yeah.
And it was kind of a career enhancement, but it was really, really talking where you were really kind of diving deep about writing and AI. And, we've got all these tools that we're in CX, we're testing writer.ai. The CX is content experience of Salesforce, but everybody's using all these tools. Wow. And I thought that was a really, really interesting, you have some really interesting takes on the actual creative process, the writing process. And I was wondering if you'd mind just kind of talking us through a little bit of that.
Wouldn't mind at all. Yeah. The kind of conceit, I suppose, or presumption in this is that what in the talk that I did was that one of our goals as an organization should really be something like, we want shared understanding. I think I put up a picture of the Borg, right, as a sort of a joke, right? But like, we kind of want everybody to have a big shared brain inside of a company where it's like, oh yeah, I know what you're doing and you know what I'm doing and I know what you're working on and you know what I'm working on, and and more, maybe more importantly than that, when there's kind of important ideas, sort of nuanced or subtle ideas of one kind or another, that we don't have a lot of like spinning our wheels and churn trying to understand each other, or that we don't, even worse, that we don't misunderstand each other and both go off in what turn out to have been totally different directions, right? I mean, this is what anybody in any company ideally wants, right? I joke that this has been my job for the last 10 years, and I've completely failed at it because doing this is really hard, right, inside of a big organization, for a bazillion reasons. And my thesis with this particular talk was something like, well, let's kind of look critically at, does generative AI help? Like, does this actually give us a ladder by which we can do a better job of just like having shared understanding and common knowledge and all of that kind of stuff? So that was really kind of the basic topic of the talk.
Well, and it was fascinating. And I'm not going to make you go through the whole presentation, but what was fascinating, I think, is that, like you say, even our corner of Salesforce content experiences is still of 550 some odd people, all committed to helping people get the most out of Salesforce. And we're all on the wind-tossed sea of AI right now, right? Because now we're kind of coming to an understanding of how Agentforce itself is going to be reaching into the content and piecing things together for people and things like that. And you had a number of insights on that, but you also had a number of insights, I think, and I'm gonna overload you here. You had a number of insights on the creative process itself, right? Writing, any writing is still a creative process. It's a very personal process, whether you use the tools or not. We want people to use AI tools, but it's still you.
Well, or it should be, and that's one of the problems that I see sometimes happening. I'm certainly not the first person to make this observation, but if you just go into an AI and say, "I'm having trouble writing something, write it for me," there's a bunch of problems with that, right? But of course, that is almost that's the affordance that the tool seems to give you. You go to ChatGPT and you open it up, and there's just a text box, and it takes quite a bit of familiarity and experimentation to get to the point where you're like, oh, that's not what I should be doing with it. And one of the books that I mentioned in this talk is a book by this guy Ethan Malik, and it's a fantastic book called Co-Intelligence. I recommend it really highly to anybody. But I think I mean, that's a whole book length, version of what I'm about to say, which is like the best way to use the AI is to help make you smarter, not do stuff for you, right? And in this particular case, if what you're trying to do is get an idea out of your head and to other people, so you can share it and get more of this kind of shared reality with people, then just that sort of naive approach of just being like, well, just write this for me so I don't have to write it, it completely misses the point. It's not going to write what's in your head because it doesn't know what's in your head, right? Like it's not magic. You have to give it more than that, but worse than that even, actually, because if you do that, oftentimes, especially if you kind of prompt it and like, oh, here's what I'm kind of trying to say, write it for me. What you'll get is maybe close enough to what it was that this spark of understanding that you actually had, that it kind of confuses you and it makes you forget what it was you were actually trying to say in the first place. I've had this happen to me where I was just like, oh, here's what I mean. And then what comes out, I'm like, well, that's not exactly what I meant, but wait, what did I mean again? Right. So the suggestion that I had there as a alternate technique from that was something relatively simple, which is basically like, well, why don't you tell the AI to interview you, right? Ask the AI to say, hey, explain your idea to me, and then tell the AI that its job is to kind of keep asking clarifying questions to you, right? And one way you can do this is if you have access to Google Meet or Zoom or any of these things where you can kind of record and transcribe what you're doing. There's a long-standing practice in the world of, well, I know it from software engineering, but probably in lots of others too, called rubber ducking, which is like if you're stuck on something, you just put a little rubber duck on the top of your monitor. I guess that wouldn't work anymore with flat screen monitors; it would fall off. But back in my day, we had big, thick monitors. You put a rubber duck on the top of the monitor, and then you explain the problem to this rubber duck, and then you talk it through, and then that's like, right. So, kind of using the AI as an interactive version of that, where you say, look, AI, your job is just to kind of interrogate me and help me clarify my idea. I don't want you to give me your own ideas. I don't want you to write it for me. I don't want you to fill it in. You just ask me questions. And if something's unclear, ask me about it, right? You can get into this kind of loop. And then you record all that, and transcribe it, and you take that transcript of the whole thing of what you said, and then you go, okay, now I'm going to throw that into an AI and say, can you format this as a draft, right? And don't make anything up, just format this as a draft. And what you get out of that is kind of a jump start on the process that can be very, very difficult and intimidating for people, which is the blank page, right? Like where do I even start? Now, often you get to that point and you're like, this isn't quite coming out right. But in the process, you have sort of forged a little bit more clarity with yourself of what it was you were trying to say. And hopefully the blank page is not as bad as it was.
That's an incredible insight that I had not thought of until I saw your presentation. And if you boil it down, like if you're going to really boil it down, you tell me if this is unfair. It's really empowering to a writer, right? Because it's saying that you are the CEO of this writing company that's writing whatever you're working on, but ultimately you are responsible for that output. Like you say, I mean, I put something in Writer AI. I asked it to rewrite a sentence and it didn't do a good job. Writer AI is great, by the way, but it didn't do a good job. And then I asked again and I asked again. And the third time it gave me 6 paragraphs. So you're absolutely right, because you can get sort of lost.
You can get lost, and you can, and it's, the way I like, I think this might've been in the new, Yuval Noah Harari book, but he says when he talks about AI, he actually thinks of it as alien intelligence as opposed to artificial intelligence. And I think that is really true. Like it's very difficult to, if you think about the AI as a person, it behaves really weirdly compared to a person, pardon my grammatical blunder. It also can do incredible things that humans can't do, and it can't do very basic things that humans can do. But if you think about it as this very totally alien thing, and then use it enough to kind of get to know it, that's much better. Now, to your point, like one of the other things I think I said in this presentation is I actually find trying to use the AI for writing myself to be incredibly frustrating because I'm extremely particular about my writing, like about I'm just like, hey, don't touch my sentences, right? Like this is my sentence. I don't want you to rearrange it. I'm that way with people too. Actually, when I have editors who like try to edit me, I'm like, no, you can give me feedback on the whole thing, but that's how I want that sentence to sound. I'm sorry, right? So I can be a little cantankerous when it comes to working with the AIs for that, I suppose. But I do really still value it quite a bit because as a thinking tool to kind of push me past my boundaries and ask it things like, what am I forgetting? What am I missing? Do any of my arguments not quite hold up? Like, yes, actually the frontier models are capable of that now.
Wow. Okay. And I was going to ask you on the querying, just in case anybody's confused about that, could you like the way you were talking about the rubber ducking, and would it be unfair, or could you just kind of give kind of a blue sky example of how that would work in case, because I think I have a clear understanding, but I want to make sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great idea.
Yeah, so the way that I would set it up would be something like this. I think I had an example. Where did I put that? Can't quite find my example here. So an example would be something like, oh, here it is. Okay. The prompt that I had said was, I said, dear AI, hey, I want to write a clear, compelling piece about a new idea I'm developing. My goal is eventually to draft a well-structured, engaging, insightful explanation. Please ask me a series of 20 probing, open-ended questions that will help me clarify my core idea, refine its context, identify key supporting details, anticipate potential misunderstandings, and ultimately guide me toward a strong, coherent draft. Now, I didn't write that prompt. ChatGPT wrote that prompt when I said, give me a prompt that would be really good for the following situation. And I kind of described it loosely, right? And then it wrote that very succinct prompt, which is also like, that's an unlock that not that many people think of like, yeah, ask the AI for a good prompt. Because then once you get the prompt, I mean, this is the key loop, Stan, with all of this stuff is like, it's incredibly powerful to kind of iterate back and forth with AI, right? Where you say, here's kind of what I want. And it gives you back and you go, no, this not yes to this, no to that. Try again, right? And this is a mode of interacting that would be incredibly rude with humans, right? If you like said, okay, hey, Stan, that thing you just said, okay, but what would just change this one? Now say it again. Okay, no, now say it again, right? Like you'd never do that. That would be so rude. But AI doesn't care, right? It's just a robot, right? So, and in case our robot overlords are watching this someday, I didn't mean just a robot. Robots are people too. The ability to kind of iterate in that way, and say, hey, I don't even know what the right thing to ask for is. Tell me what I should be asking for. Right? It's like getting. I just thought of this analogy, but it's like you get the magic lamp, and you get 3 wishes, and your first wish maybe should be, please tell me the 2 wishes that would be the most overall beneficial for both me and the world forever, right? Or something like that, right? And it's like, oh well, I have to tell you because that was, with and by the way, with no monkey's paw, side effects or whatever, right? So, I mean, that's kind of the relationship you can be in with these things and whatever it is you're trying to explain. I mean, ultimately, the goal is you have something you're trying to get across, right? In this situation that we're talking about here, you have something you're trying to get across, and that thing you're trying to get across could be nuanced. You could maybe even not totally fully understand it yourself. And you have to go through this process of understanding and communicating, right?
That's an incredible insight of kind of turning it back and querying the AI and asking the AI to do things, frankly, that I had not thought of doing. And Peter Conrad, a couple of podcasts ago, made the observation about the alien intelligence and the thing, like you said it really well too. It can do a lot of things really well and a lot of things kind of disturbingly not well, right? And the trick is finding what it's good at.
Yeah.
So the insight on getting off the blank page and querying and kind of getting started. What other kind of discoveries have you made with using AI in this way?
Well, I mean, I think that's kind of, that's one of the ones that you can sort of start with. Now, of course, we've talked about sort of the actual editing process a little bit. And certainly that is one of the places where AI can help you a lot. And especially, I think this is much more true. Like a lot of the people that I work with, incredibly smart people, but they've used a much greater portion of their study over their life to get good at writing code or building distributed systems or whatever, and proportionally less at getting good at communicating ideas and writing and so forth. And so there's and not to mention many of them English is not their first language, right? And so just the raw sort of proficiency at communicating, they don't have it. It's much more difficult. And so in those cases, like just the AI, the things that the AI gives you in those situations is it can take you from, hey, I've written a piece that is like a real struggle to get through, to, yeah, this is fluid, right? I understand it. So that's kind of the, I suppose the tactical side of things. Now, one of the other areas that I talked about in this talk was a big stumbling block that people have when they're trying to share ideas is there's a pretty wide variety of potential audiences you could be trying to share with, right? And sometimes, yeah, this is just for my team, or this is just for my boss, or this is just for some particular well-known group, the people who use my service, or whatever that is. But other times, maybe what you're trying to do is actually convince a larger sort of cross-cutting population of people within your sphere of some idea, right? Like, oh, we shouldn't be doing developer productivity this way. We should change the way we think about it in that way, right? Or we should try this new idea that I had, or we should start this new event, or anything like that. You're sort of trying to build agreement, build mind share with people, and yet you've got 12 different audiences you could be trying to address, whether they're executives or salespeople or marketing people or engineers or whatever, right? And it's really unclear, I think, to people what should be part of any given explanations. Like, so for example, like, I mean, I mentioned audience, right? Who's this for? There's also what's the right level of detail, right? Should I write a one pager and just sort of hope everybody gets it? Should I write like 30 pages with code samples and all of this other stuff, or somewhere in between? Like, I don't know, right? Or how much context should I assume that people know, right? And that's very, very difficult. Like, should this really be, explain it like I'm 5? Probably not all the way to explain it like I'm 5, right? But you have to assume something about your audience and your interlocutors. So all of these are very difficult questions. And I think in my mind, these constitute sort of speed bumps in the writing process. Like for someone whose job is not just necessarily to like sit down and write, but who's just sort of trying to do that as part of communicating an idea, hit all these speed bumps. And so the technique that I kind of talked a little bit about there is something I call it projections. So the idea is something like, well, craft kind of the canonical version of your explanation that would really kind of be for future you. Like, let's say future you comes along and has forgotten everything about this project because it's 5 years later, and you're like, I don't even remember what I was doing back then, right? How would you boot yourself back up to understanding this thing? What's the basic stuff you would all kind of hope to understand with some fair amount of detail? And then what you do in conjunction with an AI is you say, okay, starting with this, can you make it essentially a projection or copy of this that is, condensed in the following ways and targeted at the following audience and so forth and so on, right? That where you actually sort of project, in a sense, a version, and you can do multiple versions of that. If your initial document is 15 pages of, cogent, lucid explanations and details and so forth, you could say, could you make a 6-pager of this, or could you make a 1-pager of this? And could you do it, in a way that emphasizes the following things for the following audiences, right? I happen to be kind of a bit of a skeptic when it comes to the powers of AI summary. I've yet to read AI like it's just sort of a generic case of AI taking thing A and summarizing it into thing B, and me really feeling like that was done well. And part of that is just because obviously the thing that you're looking for in thing A in this piece of writing is the thing you didn't understand, right? The thing that's novel, the point, right? The gist. But that depends on you, right? It's not, there's no universal, here was the gist, here was the universal, thing. And so, so that's why in this method I'm talking about, the idea is basically to say, with a little bit of targeting, with a little bit more specifics, could you make a projection of this that is more likely to be the right summary for my boss's boss, that kind of thing, right?
Wow. And you said something else too, and I can't remember whether it's in this conversation or one of your. I've watched a lot of Ian Varley lately, so you've got to forgive me. With your podcast and your presentations, which are all terrific. is if you're working on something like that's very specifically technical code and all sorts of things, which, and frankly, with a lot of the AI work that CX is doing, we're getting a lot of that. It's novel, it's new.
Yeah.
You talked about kind of limiting the universe because you're always afraid of it pulling in something outside that's nonsensical or that's a hallucination, and you're ultimately responsible for that, et cetera. And you talked about bounding it, right? Work
Yeah.
with only how can you just give a general outline of that in case people aren't familiar with that idea?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you think about what a large language model really is, of course, it's like a statistical model of a huge corpus of text, right? And now this huge corpus of text is actually a huge corpus of ideas, right? They're not to say truth, right? But meaning, right? There's a huge corpus of meaning out there. And the AI has created a statistical model of some considerable depth that represents all of those concepts in various ways, all interlinked, right? And in a way, it is sort of an encapsulation of the sphere of human communication and knowledge, right? Which is not to say truth, right? That is not necessarily a statement about the truth or falsity of anything that's in there. And in fact, you should assume that there's a lot of falsity in there. But kind of more importantly, all of that stuff that's in there, if you're asking it a question and you want truth to come out of it, good luck, right? Like that's you have a very little, unless it's an incredibly obvious and well-known thing. What you're going to get out is not truth to conformity to some external standard of truth. It's going to be a statistical average answer that is statistically ish correct to what you wanted, right? And so if what you're asking is like, how long should I cook salmon? You're going to get the right answer, right? Because that's statistically like very stable, right? Or what tell me about the life of George Washington, right? But if you ask it something where the answer, the statistical average of knowledge on the internet wouldn't be the right answer to your question, you're going to get the wrong answer out, right? And so what that means, and that there's lots of situations where that's true. Well, maybe I'm trying to ask about something that is sort of specific to data about me and my company and what we're working on, right? Or maybe it's just something kind of personal to me, or for whatever reason, right? People call this hallucination in the sense that like, well, it's happy to continue spouting stuff that is sort of statistically average, statistically correct, right? Which I think that was lies and statistics was I think the Mark Twain quote, right? And so you have to, like, that has to be your starting assumption. Unless what you wanted to come out was the statistical average, it's going to be wrong. You have to assume it's going to be wrong. Now, what can you do about that? Well, that's where something called retrieval augmented generation comes in, which means in your prompt and the context you're giving in this conversation with the LLM, you put in a bunch of stuff that you consider to be ground truth, right? And that could be a document you're talking about, or that could be a Wikipedia entry, or whatever it is, right? But you say, okay, this is the ground truth about the thing. And then you're essentially saying, don't make stuff up. Use what I told you. Now, this is finicky. And in particular, it's finicky because what in many cases, what you really wanted was for it to take that and what it knows statistically about the universe from its training and kind of merge them in some magical way. And what ends up happening is it is very reliant on whatever you put in the context, right? It really weights that much more heavily than whatever was in its base model. And so there's cases where it sort of slavishly follows whatever it was you told it in your prompt and in your context, to a point of not even making sense. But that's the general model. And in fact, I mean, if you think about Salesforce and our products and Agentforce and all that kind of stuff, that is kind of the ground level for Salesforce. Why the AI that Salesforce makes is useful, because that's the whole premise of it. It's saying, well, we know what's true about you and your company and your organization because it's in Salesforce. And so when we ground what you're doing on the things that are in Salesforce, whether that's knowledge articles or documentation or actual data, your opportunities, leads, and all that kind of stuff, whatever that is, when it's grounded in that, you know that that's where it's getting its information, rather than sort of plucking it from its own kind of depths of its statistical model. So that's kind of the general approach that you should be trying to take with regard to truth and factuality, if that is in fact what you want out of your answer.
Yeah, no, that's really insightful, because you're explaining, and you're podcast, which explained Agentforce very well, which unfortunately is only for internal audiences. This is for external. Is taking the way Salesforce does work, which is what we've talked about publicly, but you can also reduce that into the universe of things that you're doing, the projects that you're, and to some extent. But you can't be afraid to, as you say, query, go back, ask it to revise. You can't be afraid of interacting.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, really, like, I want to sort of preface this by saying I don't speak for Salesforce and the official descriptions of Agentforce and so on and so forth. But I will tell you, my mental model of it is, when you create an agent with Agentforce, what you're doing is you're encapsulating some amount of expertise, some amount of like domain expertise by an expert. And it's some slice of what that expert knows and can do, right? And really, that is, at the end of the day, that's just prompts that are bundled together with data and actions. And then the magic, the Salesforce magic, is we have this incredibly sophisticated reasoning engine and action selection model and knowledge management stuff that's kind of built into Agentforce. That stuff is really cool. But what you kind of get at the end of this is this daemon, essentially, that represents this expertise, right? That can do these things reliably because it's grounded on the right knowledge and it has a constrained set of actions, and it kind of all pulls it together. And so, like, that's the value proposition there for agents and for Agentforce, which I think actually is, when we think about what you would want if you're talking to an automated agent, that's what you want. You want it to know what it's talking about, right? And the only way it knows what it's talking about is if it is grounded on what some group of humans agreed was true, right? Now, that's in practice, that's quite difficult to do, especially when when the group of humans is really large and they create all kinds of different artifacts during the process of doing what they do all day and meeting notes and whatever, right? It's, many a slip twixt cup and lip, I suppose. But that's the theory of it. And when done well, it's really, really effective.
That's incredible. Yes, that's a fantastic explanation. I want to go back to something else you said earlier, which is I have edited a lot, as an editor, so I know you're fans of editors, of course.
Oh, very much.
That's
I'm married to one, in fact. Yeah,
that is the correct answer. Okay, on both fronts. No, it's that the most expensive editing that you can do. You talk about AI and efficiency and things like that. The most expensive editing you can do is editing for clarity, like saying, "I think this is what you mean."
Yeah.
That is basically rewriting, and we've all done it. And we're running a pilot now, and we expect to see less of that. We shouldn't see any of it at this point, right? And that editing for clarity of prose, meaning that if you do ever get feedback that says, this is a little murky, or this isn't, I'm not getting the point, because I have blind spots. We all have blind spots. I send things out all the time, and my boss will say, well, I don't know what you're talking about. I forgot to give him the context,
Yeah.
And so AI should be just base layer for something like that, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, in particular, even if it doesn't actually, like, one of the nice things that you'll find as you kind of get in the habit of using AI is, I guess, what's the word that I'm looking for? Like, there's just a surfeit of things that it can do for you, where you can say, hey, give me 50 things that might be wrong with this piece of writing, right? You would never tell a human that, but you could say, give me 50 ideas about how to fix this. And then this is one of these, I think, so there was a podcast that Clara Shai did with Richard Socher at one point on the Ask More of AI podcast that she does. And in this particular podcast, she, if I recall right, they were talking about this idea of how hard is something to do versus how hard is it to verify. And they called this the Socher ratio, Richard Socher being the former chief scientist at Salesforce. And so you're kind of in this sweet spot when there is something that is difficult to do but easy to verify, right? So writing code is a great example of that for AIs, because anyone who's ever written code knows it's really just hard mental labor to write code. Like, you got to keep a lot of stuff in your head. It's not always pleasant. You make mistakes all the time, right? Very difficult to do. And AI do it very, very fast. Now, if they do it wrong, you would think, well, that's terrible. But that's the nice thing, is code is generally very easy to verify. You just write a test for the behavior that you want. If it didn't do the thing you wanted, do it again, right? Write it again. And so that has a very good social ratio in that sense, right? And I think there are, the writing and editing, especially at the idea level, especially at the clarity level, can be like that, because you can say, well, give me 20, ways that I could make this better, or 20 blind spots I have, or 20 whatever. And then it doesn't take you long to go down that list and be like, nah. Oh, interesting. Yeah, I can fix that one. Not, right?
That's an incredible insight. And I think I I think the insight, if you just turn it, you're kind of turning the whole thing upside down, really, and saying,
Mhm.
here's something for you,
Yeah.
AI. You tell me. And I honestly, I had not thought of that. I've been using it for all sorts of other things and trying various things. So I think that turning it upside down like that is a great insight. And it means that if you've got something that you've started with that let's say is accurate, correct?
Mhm.
It's technically accurate, but may have problems. You can say, tell me what the problems are, is what you're
Yeah.
saying, right? I mean,
And sometimes that does take a little bit of investment upfront for a project you're working on. I was working on something this year where I kind of wanted to be in this relationship of getting advice, right, from the AI. But I was like, man, what a stumbling block it is to every interaction, because the AI comes fresh to every interaction, to explain myself fully. Like, what is it I'm doing? Why am I doing it? What have I already done? What have I thought about? Right. What I ended up doing was actually writing. I think it may have been coming at maybe 2 pages of writing. It was just a very simple, like, here's what I'm doing, and here's why I'm doing it. Here's what I'm trying, and here's where we are in the project. Like, just, a couple pages of, like, if someone new came onto your team, what you might say to them to kind of boot them up, right? And I just saved that in a doc. And then I was like, in every interaction to the AI where I wanted something, I would start with that. I would just paste that in and be like, now, given all that, what do you think about this as a structure for such and such, or whatever? So I wouldn't have to, of course, retype that every time, just copy and paste it in. And now, of course, some tools, ChatGPT and so forth, have, in fact, ChatGPT just introduced this idea of projects, which is essentially just a wrapper around doing exactly that, right? You can give it a bunch of files that become part of the project, and then your interactions within that project are all prefaced by that, which is really nice. But it's just achieving this thing. The hard part of it was the actual sitting down and creating this thing that was the baseline. But once you've done that, then you're operating from a much more useful perspective of what it's giving you back. You're still the one, at least at this point in human history, we are still the ones that are in the driver's seat. We're still the ones that are, having the ideas and caring about what's happening and having the long-term view. Right? It's leveraging both sides for what they're really good at. The AI is really good. It's a calculator for words. It's really good at taking a bunch of concepts, mashing them up together, coming up with ideas, and then using its vast trove of, sort of the conceptual machinery of human linguistic utterances over time to then, do interesting, powerful manipulations on that, right? And as long as you know that that's what it can do, then you come in as the curator and as the bit of wisdom, where you go, okay, well, what about this? And then it says, da, 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 da. And you're like, no, garbage, garbage, garbage. Oh, interesting. I hadn't thought about that one. Develop that one for me, right? Or whatever. It's a whole new way, honestly, of interacting with machines, and it's super weird and it's super unintuitive. And honestly, like, the thing that I mentioned before, the kind of oh, this is just magic, do a thing for me, take this off my plate. Like, I think that is the absolute worst way to use AI. Um, and if, of course, it's the most common, right? Because it's very easy, right? Just, oh, I don't want to do this thing, do it for me. There's that joke of, like, hey, I don't want to write a recommendation letter, write it for me. And then the person getting it said, I don't want to read a recommendation letter, read it for me, right? And it's just like, no human ever actually read any of this stuff, right? And so, but I think there are, and Ethan Mollick's book is a great expounding on this notion. There's so many more powerful ways that we could be using it right now, and can and should be using
that is awesome. At least this point in human history is where I'm still in.
I mean,
That's got me gripping the desk. But
yeah, you laugh, but it's I mean, the rate of change,
I'm not laughing.
computers have only been around for 80 years, man. And, like, look how fast, look what's happened, right? And what's going to happen 20 years from now. I don't think you can make prognostications about that are more than just guesses at this point. But I certainly know what I want. And actually, the Harari book that I mentioned before, Nexus, is actually great in the sense that that's exactly what he's engaging with. It's like, well, okay, we are still in control. He says this at one point. We are still in control for now. How do we want to try to chart our path forward, such that these machines are actually benevolent and beneficial for humans? And if you think there's an easy answer to that, and then you're, 500 years of philosophical history wants to have a word with you, right? Because it's not that simple to know what we want or to know how to get it, or to assume that just because we have better tools, better information, that's going to lead us to the promised land. It's not. Like, we have to be very actively engaged with this. And so that's the thing I tell people over and over again. And it's, again, this is really just, kind of parroting Ethan Mollink's words, but you need to be spending time yourself hands-on with these things every day, if you can, right? Even if just find some pretext to do it, because you want to be inclining your mindset in the direction of, like, what are they really capable of? What are they really doing? What's the sort of jagged edge of what they can do right now? How are they changing? And they're changing really fast. It's on all of us to be in that relationship with them.
No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right to find the ways that it can most effectively help you right now, right? And your idea of just creating a couple of pages of boilerplate. I mean, I know you say ChatGPT has projects now, but if you use like if you use Skyne and Slack or whatever, just pasting in the boilerplate, that's a great idea. Another one I hadn't thought of.
It was super useful. I did it with a project, as I mentioned, with this project, and I was basically like, hey, what should I be doing right now? Right. And it was cool because I said, give me a list of 20 things I should be doing right now for this project. And it gave me a list of 20 things, and 17 of them, I was like, cool. I'm doing that. I'm doing that. And then I got to, like, this one. I was like, oh my God, what a cool suggestion. I hadn't even thought of that. Of course, that's going to be super useful. Why didn't I think of that? Right. And that, that abundance, like, hopefully we're moving into a world where we have abundance of energy and abundance of water and abundance of all these other things. Right. But what these things are is an abundance of intelligence. Now, that's not the same thing as wisdom or truth, just to be clear. But it's this raw material that all of a sudden is just gushing out of a pipe, and we got to figure out how to use it.
That's great. And you're talking about ensuring that things are benevolent in the future, which is way beyond both of our pay grades. But you're right about raw knowledge not being wisdom, not right. That there is kind of a spiritual realm that humans are still responsible for. But have you ever seen Colossus, the Forbin project?
No.
Okay. Well, it's where they build a supercomputer. It's a great movie. Build a supercomputer. And of course, the Americans build one, the Russians build one. They both develop an inevitable will to power. They link up and they and then, of course, they go to disconnect them, and they circumvent all attempts to disconnect them. So what do you think? I mean, I know it's pure speculation, but how do you think that we achieve what the desired outcome that you just outlined about this being benevolent and helpful and not overpowering and dominating?
I mean, it's a phenomenal question. If I could tell you the answer to that, I'm sure lots of people would want to have a word with me. I don't think any of us know. My instinct, my inclination is decentralization, right? Just as a single facet of saying, like, well, just make sure that there's sort of checks and balances in the form of lots of projects, lots of people trying to do lots of different things, as opposed to centralization, which is going to lead towards sort of totalitarianism and authoritarianism and whatever, all of those sorts of things. We don't want that. I mean, the beautiful thing about a democracy is sort of the presumption that there should be lots of different ways of doing everything, and that everybody should kind of be free to do things in the way that they want. Now, that's, of course, tricky on the flip side, because, I mean, I'm a huge advocate of open source in general. And, when you think about, like, oh, sure, just make a bunch of open models. I was talking to somebody in the security world recently who does, Gen AI type stuff. And he said, yeah, it didn't take us long to, have it, spout the recipes for, creating dynamite, or creating, MDMA, or creating, bioweapons are a little bit further afield from that. You need a bit more than that, than just talking to ChatGPT. But even so, the point being, like, yeah, this is just this giant spigot of intelligence, but intelligence is not inherently good or bad. Intelligence is a tool. And, I know Sam Harris tends to say things like, more intelligence is always good, which I think I agree with on the whole, right? And like, without intelligence, the world we know does not exist. Sanity and human relations and family and none of that exists without intelligence. So more intelligence is a good thing. Yes. And intelligence is a tool like any other and can go wrong. So guess decentralization, checks and balances, and I think that's the only thing we've kind of got going for us in the long run. But it's quite a perilous road ahead for sure.
I agree with you, and that was a very unfair question, so I appreciate you. No, I mean, it's impossible to answer, of course, but your insights on how to use, how to think about this miracle, right? It's miraculous how quickly it's evolving, as a tool to help us are just, I think, really, really terrific. So I so appreciate your taking the time to talk. I'd ask you if you have any other insights, but I've already taken up a lot of your time.
Yeah. Oh, I'm happy to stay and chat about this kind of until the cows come home. But I don't. I think we're it's funny, the title of the talk that you were referring to that I gave internally was slightly less impossible, and I think that's the last thing that I would say is like we should approach all of this with a measure of humility, whatever it is that we're promising or doing or trying to do. We don't these aren't if you talk to many of the startup founders out there, right, or kind of Silicon Valley folks who are building companies and so forth, invariably they will tell you, oh well, this thing is going to change the world, my thing is going to revolutionize the universe, and and maybe it will, maybe it won't, but I think the right intellectual stance and the right moral stance towards all of these things is humility. We don't know what we don't know. We don't know what the impacts of what we do are. And we want to help each other and help the world. And we should be a little careful. We're playing with fire here, right? And it's yeah, I don't know. It's easy to kind of go down the road of like, wow, this is going to completely usher in a future, a beautiful, perfect future, and it's not. It never has. It never will. That's okay. But I'm definitely in the Steven Pinker camp of like, well, things do get better over millennia, right? I think they can still keep getting better, which is not to say that it's a sure thing, right? There's lots of paths that don't lead to that. So.
Well, I mean, that's amazing, and your hope for a future of abundance, I think, is great. With all these AI data centers, maybe that'll be the trigger that gets us fusion power and unlimited energy. So, but I cannot thank you enough. I think your insights are amazing, and always enjoyed listening to you. And I feel very privileged to be able to have a conversation with you. So
well, thank you, Stan. I really love the work that you do here. I'm an avid fan of this podcast, of course, and all the spreading of understanding. I think there's this community of people who do the kind of work that you do. And I mentioned before, I'm an open source fan in general. And I understand the reason that companies exist, of course, and that we're all kind of, we do our own separate things. But I personally also am really excited about the notion of spanning communities of people who are like-minded or who work on similar things and try to help each other across all of those lines, right? So open source projects, but the community of writers and the community of technical writers, and across the world. Like, I think this podcast is a really thought-provoking one, and does really great work for them. So thanks for doing that.
Oh, thank you very much, and thank you for explaining a lot of these complicated engineering to many of us in the company, and now to a wider world. So thanks, Ian, and
yeah.
And have a great weekend.
Thank you. Enjoy your holidays.
Yeah, you as well.